All right, Pastor Mike here. Good to have you here. Let's do our Bible study. Let's get rolling here. We're in Nehemiah chapter 3. Welcome back. If you haven't been with us for a while, this is our YouTube Bible study small group, and we got this going in a variety of places. Feel free to go back and watch the last several sessions that we had so you can kind of make it up to chapter 3. We're taking our time digging into the Word and having a good time here in our Bible study. So we're going to start out, though, with taking a moment to read chapter 3. Now, chapter 3 seems like an obscure chapter, but it really has some good stuff. I'm sure you'll agree. The focus tonight is on the first 12 verses. So if you want to take a moment and at least make it through the first 12 verses of chapter 3. So let's take time and read chapter 3 of the book of Nehemiah. All right, welcome back. A lot of interesting names and things here. In fact, the first one here, my first question is for you to do something that kind of helps you to kind of find your way and learn some of the context. And it's like when we found how far it was from Nehemiah, where he was, to Jerusalem and some things like that. So in the first 12 verses, the focus on just the first 12 verses, and we'll do the next one, the rest of the chapter in the next study here. But in the first 12 verses, here's your question. All right, figure this out. Take a few moments to discuss this amount in your group, or if you're doing this by yourself or with a spouse, just pause it here and come up with the answers here the best you can. And there will be a little fuzzy on some of this, but how many names are mentioned and how many gates are mentioned in just the first 12 verses? Won't make you do the whole chapter, but how many different names are mentioned, how many different people, names are mentioned, and how many gates are mentioned. Nehemiah is rebuilding the wall and the gates. How many gates? How many names? Take a look and see what you can come up with. All right, interesting stuff, and I know the variety of different answers there based on the parents of this person and that person and things along that line, but hope you got a little context there. So the second question here I want to give you is it just an important principle here, and this is the idea of we take Scripture and compare it to Scripture. That's how we learn things. And when we compare Scriptures, sometimes we find some contrasts and sometimes we find some similarities. So there are two verses in these first 12 here that we kind of got some different things in them, and I want you to kind of take a look at them. So I want you to look at chapter 3 verse 1, and I want you to compare it with chapter 3 verse 5. Okay, so look at chapter 3 verse 1, look at verse 1 and look at verse 5, and what can we learn from the differences that are here? What things are going on that are lessons for us to learn? So what might we learn from the comparison of chapter 3 verse 1 and verse 5? Take a moment and see what you can come up with. All right, that's good. I hope you found some interesting things there. I certainly found some great lessons there between the way that people were working on the wall in verse 1 and the way they were working on the wall in verse 5 there. Some different stuff, so hope you found some good things there. And that's, like I say, this is kind of to help you have some good discussion and dig into that and make some application. It's like, would you rather be like the people in verse 5 or verse 1 or verse 1 or verse 5? I mean, really, there's some interesting things. And how do you respond when leadership works, and how do you respond when some of the leaders were not working? Some interesting thoughts there. So sometimes leaders don't lead, and how do we need to deal with that? Good question. So, all right, question number 3. All right, the building of the wall around Jerusalem was a God project. That's kind of what I call it. This was a God thing, okay? Things like this often require all hands on deck. Wall building is tough and rugged work, But who do we find doing the work in verse 8? This is specifically to verse 8. So who do we find doing the wall building in verse 8? What were their vocations? And then here's really kind of the deeper question. It says, what do you think it is that motivates people to serve outside of their skill set? In other words, people have different skills and tendencies and propensities, things that they're good at and not good at. And in verse 8, we find an unusual group of people, two different groups of people, doing the work of wall building. And what do you think it is that motivates them to work outside their skill set? And have you been motivated, or is there times when you work outside your skill set? And what motivates you? So let's leave that there. That's a good one. Take some time and discuss this one. All right, good. Hope you learned a little bit about goldsmiths there and apothecaries. Those are the guys that run the drugstores. And sometimes we do need to serve outside of our skill set. So, question number 4. This one's a little broader, and I want you to read verses 9 through 12. So just kind of read through 9 and 12, and amongst your group, come up with your observations there. Okay, we've started to kind of dig into who these different people are. There's some good stuff here, but what are your observations in chapter 3, 9 through 12? And you can kind of dig into some of the little details there. And so kind of what have you seen about the work and the workers in those verses? And then kind of a question I have, and this one's a little bit more open-ended, but it's sort of, you can discuss this one too. So, and I wrote this down. Nehemiah has recruited many workers and has great momentum at this part. I'm sure he was thrilled with walking around seeing other people doing things. As the leader of the God Project, okay, so he was the head of this project. What do you think was keeping Nehemiah busy at these times? So when all these other things were happening, what do you think Nehemiah was doing and should be doing and was doing and needed to do? What was it like for Nehemiah during this actual process of all these different things happening? Take a look at that one and discuss that one. So. All right, like we always like to do, we like to have a word of prayer and kind of finish things up with some prayer. And there are many things here in this chapter, this first 12 verses, that deal with us personally, the way that we work, the way that we interact with other people, the way that we respond when we're asked to do a job. And our prayer time might be something along the line of, Lord, help me to be the best kind of worker. Help me to be a servant. Help me to be the right have the right attitude when I need to have the right attitude. So that would be something that you could pray about. So let's take a moment now and have a word of prayer. And then we will see you next week, or we'll see you at church on Sunday. So God bless. Take some time for prayer now.